Hello everyone, Kent.Bressler here. I want to welcome you to Kent's Kidney Stories. During our time together over these podcasts, I'd like to discuss kidney disease. I'd like to tell you about my journey as a transplant patient, but also talk about dialysis, kidney donation, and just about anything else that might be of interest. Kent's Kidney Stories, a podcast endorsed and sponsored by kidneysolutions.org. Hello everybody, Kent.Bressler. We're going to do a little podcasting. Really have been having a great time with this, and I wanted to thank Jason Nunez, my fellow transplant recipient and also engineer for this project. I couldn't do it without him. So we've been take a 20-minute exercise to discuss things before we even start these. We started recording them because they're pretty insightful, and maybe we'll publish them all and you can listen to those. Before we begin this morning, I wanted to, offer a prayer up to our Lord and Savior. Father, I pray that you would move the Spirit more boldly in my life. I know that my sin can grieve and diminish the voice of the Spirit, and I pray against the temptation to sin. Help me crave your presence more than I can crave sin. Help me grow in the fruit of the Spirit, and so walk closer with you. I pray for guidance from your Spirit, and let your will and promises always be meditation of my heart and for my heart. I ask also that you bless all of those caregivers out there, first responders, doctors, nurses, anyone who is in the middle of this coronavirus pandemic. Bless them, keep them safe, and if they should fall to this virus, that you protect them in their body, mind, and spirit. I ask this in your name. Amen. Well, I have one thing before I start I wanted to mention. My wife and I have been married for 50 years. And that's not lost on me. That's a long time. And we've worked since we were 14 years old. And when I think about that lifespan, she's never been home with me all day long, except on a weekend or occasionally when we would travel. Her business, she had to close her business during this pandemic. Didn't really want to, but couldn't really we couldn't get situated with the landlord. It didn't work. He wasn't about to budge on the rent, and so long story short, she just closed it up. She came home and said, I'm done. I can't do this anymore. I don't want to do it anymore. It pains me. So we spent 4 days getting rid of all the things out of the shop. And that's 50 years, mind you, 40 years of hairstyling, pretty much in the same place, 30 for sure. And all of the equipment and all of the stuff she'd accumulated, which had never been gone through, came out and went in our garage and our back room and our porch. So you can imagine what it looks like. Anyway, I have been blessed. It has been about 2 weeks now that she's been home every day, and I've heard the story told. Listen, you'll never get along. You can't be together that long. You something. Well, guess what? They're wrong. It may change as we move, as we get around each other a lot, but at this point in time, it's been a real blessing. So I can tell you, having somebody that you really love around you is the most important thing in your life. And thank God that she's with me, and I think she grateful to be home too. I see a different woman. Uh, she's much more at peace. And so we move on. And that's what we're all going to have to do. They say we're going to get back to normal. I don't buy that. I think it's going to be a different normal. And I think most people realize that. But as a transplant patient, let me tell you, it is going to be a different normal, but it's going to be the same for me regardless. I'm going to take care of myself. So keep that in mind when you think about when they give the green light to go. Don't worry about that green light. You still have to take care of yourself. Remember, you're in charge. Not your wife, not your brother, not your sister, not your mother, not your father. You are in charge of your health. And don't forget it. If you forget it, that's when you'll have trouble. Okay, so what are we going to talk today about? I think what I would like to talk about is migraine headaches. It doesn't sound like much of a topic, but I have suffered with migraine headaches, and I've had several friends have had them. And over the lifetime of my transplant, which at the end of this month will be 33 years, I had it before I had the transplant. They got even worse early on in the transplant, and I've had them on occasion, but I think I finally outgrew them. I think that they always happened to me, and they were debilitating. They were crushing. I had a horrible time with them. And so I kind of wanted to go over what migraines really do to you. And I gleaned a lot of things from my reading, and a lot of it has happened to me. So let's just talk about migraines for a while. You know, my migraines always, every last one that I had over the years, always started over my left eye, my sinus, like in my sinus area. And it began as a throbbing. I knew right away when something triggered something over my left eye, it was Katie bar the door, because it was coming. And invariably, once it did happen, it incapacitated. It progressed from, oh, I'm getting a migraine, to, oh, I got a migraine, and oh my gosh, what am I going to do? It was jump in bed, cover your head, and don't get up till morning. And then it always lasted at least 3 days with a hangover after that. So, it's different for everybody. I understand that. But in my case, it was tragically difficult to live with them. I didn't like them. And they came around quite often right after I had the transplant, which I owed a lot to being from the medication adjustments and the constant stress of working and paying attention to what I was supposed to be doing, taking care of kids. I mean, it's a multitude of things. No one knows what triggers these migraines, but I can tell you that stress has a lot to do with it. So you got to kind of control your stress. So most of these migraines cause this. I have a throbbing pain sensation, and it's a pulsing. It's a heart pounding pulsation, and it's usually on one side of the head. And mine, as usual, or common, were accompanied by nausea and vomiting and an extreme sensitivity to light and sound. So in everything that goes on in an environment, the more pronounced it gets, the worse the headache gets. So when you try to respond to one of these characters, you got to dampen everything down. You got to get in a less glaring light situation, and you got to turn the volume down real quick. And then you got to realize you kind of got to sequester yourself for recovery. You got to rest, and that's the most important thing. Is if it's really severe, you're going to need to be medicated for it. We'll talk about that in a little bit, because there are things on the market, and there's some dangerous things for transplant and kidney patients to take that you have to be careful of. And we'll talk about those in a little bit. Most people have a warning sign, which is usually an aura. That's a visual disturbance. You'll see a flash of light or blind spots, not those little floaters in your eyes, but actually blind spots. It would be so intense that you'll have a spot, a portion of one or two eyes that it gets dark. All right. And these disturbances are tingling, and it usually is going to happen on one side of the face, on your leg, and you might have some difficulty speaking. It's not so uncommon to have it so bad that it might mimic stroke symptoms. And although that's very extreme, it can happen. Like I said, we know that medications or combinations of medications plus lifestyle changes could help. It's not gonna, there's no cure. There's no magic bullet for this, but you got to change your lifestyle. It's very important to make sure that you're dampening down the stress levels. Some people get associated with some kinds of foods that sets these things off. My brother would have gout plus headaches, and he can associate it with certain foods. So the gout and the migraines to boot, it's difficult, but you can usually pinpoint what's going to start them. If you go through the literature and talk about these, there are a lot of things like an aura. One of the things that a lot of people have is a frequent yawning. They'll yawn, and yawning is, I don't know what the equivalent of it would be, but for instance, a yawn is a lack of oxygen. And so when you yawn all the time, it usually indicates that you're either tired, fatigued, or your oxygen levels aren't right. And then when you have a migraine headache coming on, and when it gets there, your oxygen levels can drop. All right. And these symptoms that you get usually begin gradually. They don't just hit you instantly. You get a kind of a forewarning of what's coming on. Now, when you have an aura, when you actually have that experience, this visual phenomenon, you might see some shapes, bright spots and flashes. You might have pins and needles sensations in your arms or legs, tinglings. There's a chance you might have some vision loss. Now, it's not permanent, it's temporary. And then weaknesses in your face on one side of your body. And then hearing noises or music. And then you can have some uncontrollable jerking or other types of movements with these. Now, remember, these are not common to everyone. Hear me now. It's different strokes for different folks, regardless of who you are, and your symptoms in the beginning may not be the same. They may alter or change. And so you have to be mindful that the end result is a incapacitating, in the bed, throwing up, vomiting, nausea type of headache. Okay, if you're a working person, it can be as much as being off work for 3 days because you can't function. That's a migraine. Headache's a headache. Migraine's a migraine. You got a migraine and you're a working person. I can tell you sometimes, although you can't afford it all the time, when they come on, it's bad. It's very difficult to handle. Okay, as far as attacks, these attacks that you have, these migraines, if you will, they usually last from 4 to 72 hours. You can have a real small one. Some people do. And if they go untreated, they can last a long time. So, and how often you have them often varies from person to person. They might occur rarely or strike several times a month. I know that I would have, when I first started with them, I was having them 2 or 3 times a month. And when I would go to my nephrologist, my pal, Dr. Mulgrew, I remember one time going in, this is right after the transplant, and he said, "You having a headache?" I said, "Yeah, right now." He said, I told him I got a migraine starting. So he used an injectable form. Back then, it was pretty new. It's called Imatrix. And he gave me a shot in my thigh. And that, man alive, I wanted to take a whole package of those with me when I went home because they really worked. I mean, I'm talking about shutting her down. Now, I did take that medicine, that Imitrex, on a frequent basis, but I had to be very, very careful. And I really was concerned about what it was going to do to my kidney. But sometimes, and I knew, and I had a bad one coming on, the sooner I took that Imitrex, uh, the quicker I was going to get better. And then that was now, mind you, that was 30 years ago. We're talking about a drug that's been around that long, and I know there are newer drugs on the market for this, and I'm not going to get into those. I don't understand how they work. That's why you got doctors, and that's why they are going to treat this. And most transplant programs and most transplant nephrologists know the concept of migraine headache. They know that their patients get it. And if you don't get one, bless you. I'm glad. But there's a small majority of us that do get them. I don't know what the percentage is, but it's small. So just remember, there are medications out there. And your doctor's the one that's going to talk about it and work out, and they're going to get the right one for you. All right. Now, after you have a migraine attack, after this, however long it takes, mine usually lasted 3 days. And they would gradually get better as the days went on. The first very intense with the nausea, the vomiting, and then I'd sleep as much as 10, 12 hours at a time, and then eventually it subsided. But then after 2, 3 days, then I had a hangover. I mean, it drains you. And if you're undiagnosed with these migraines, you're having headaches a lot, you need to get it diagnosed. You need to go to a doctor and get him to figure out if it's migraine induced, and then get on something to help it. You need to keep a record. I always wish that I had kept a journal through my 33 years, but I'm a talker, not a writer. So I would have had to talk through it instead of writing about it. Anyway, I think a journal is a good thing, especially if you start experiencing headaches. Start writing down what time they occur, what time of the month they occur, uh, how long they last, what your symptoms are, and then you can go back and look over the course of a month, 2 months, 3 months, 6 months, and see the trend or the possibility that this is recurring migraine headaches, and that's going to be good information for the doctor. I encourage you, though, if they start, that you see a physician right away. Your nephrologist can help you very quickly, and don't wait for 6 to 8 months to do something about it. Can't stand it. Even if you have a history of headache, if they get persistently worse and they're different, that's when to go see the doctor. If there are some of us, and I know I've done this, if you see your doctor immediately, sometimes I do know I went a couple times to the emergency room. It was so bad. Actually, I worked in a hospital. I was an RN, and when it got bad, I just progressed down, and they medicated me. Um, there are several medications that you can use. I won't get into all those. Uh, but the long-term effect of a medication is the most important thing. You just can't take this. There are certain medications for when you're in an acute attack, and then there's medications that you can take to stabilize the effects and hopefully dampen down or minimize the attacks. And those that need to be discussed with your physician. I can't go into those at each because they're important. You need to make sure you're going to your physician and getting their instructions. If you have an abrupt or severe headache, like a thunderclap, uh, if you have a fever, stiff neck, some mental confusion, some people have even had seizures. All of these things that you have can cause injury to your brain. All right. I mean, long term, they will cause some possibility of seizures. So you need to treat this. Don't be afraid of it. It's common. And it's very easy to treat. Can't make it go away. It's a chronic headache. and it always seems to get worse when you have one, when you got a cough or you're exerting, and sudden strains in your movements while you have these headaches. It's not gonna be good for you. One of the most important things that I want to tell you about is if you are a transplant patient and it starts and you're like in your 50s and these start later on, you really need to see a physician, because most of these progress from childhood, actually, these migraine headaches. But because of the stress of immunosuppression and the stress of being having had a transplant, living with the transplant, all these things can add up. But anytime there's a change, and especially as you get older, seek medical attention right away. Don't poo-poo it and say, it'll go away, because it isn't going to go away. If anything, it'll get worse. We don't know fully why migraines occur. They're not understood very well. It's much better than it was when I first started out. But genetics and environmental factors do play a pretty major role. There's been diagnoses made of changes in the brainstem and maybe changes with the trigeminal nerves. And all the major pain pathways to the brain are always involved with these things because there's imbalances. It could very easily be a chemical imbalance in your brain. No need to go into that, but if you don't have medical attention for these, it could be a common thing that's triggering them, and it could be from your electrolytes or something within your system that's causing them. And when you seek medical help, they can iron all that out. Okay, triggers. Not Lone Ranger triggers, but triggers for migraines. Women have hormonal changes. They have fluctuations in their estrogen levels. And these hormonal medications and things like contraceptives and anything that deals with trying to manipulate the hormonal system are big triggers. Alcohol. Oh my goodness. For those of you who drink out there, excessive use of alcohol, yeah, that's a common cause, especially wine. You'll know if you start having these headaches and you quit drinking the wine, it pretty much goes away. Then again, it might not. The thing of it is that alcohol will trigger it, and you don't know how much it'll take before it will trigger it, and it can trigger it just on your first drink. So be real careful. Now, caffeine, excess amounts of caffeine. If you're a 3-pot a day coffee drinker, yeah, you're gonna get some headaches, and a lot of them gonna be. But one of the interesting things about this, caffeine, if you're not a heavy caffeine user and you get a migraine, caffeine seems to help. It seems to dampen it down. Sensory stimuli, I mean, this is a big trigger. Sun glare, bright lights, loud noises, strong smells, paint thinners, perfume, anything that you really are offended by can sometimes trigger these. Sleeping changes, weather conditions, and medications. Yeah. There's a wealth of things that can trigger this. You have to kind of figure out what it is once you've been diagnosed with these migraines, what it is that triggers them, because that's what you want to make sure that you're trying to minimize, and it'll help you in the long run to make sure that your experiences with a migraine are lessened. Maybe you can eliminate some of them just by looking at what you're putting in your mouth, or what you're hearing, what you're seeing. Food additives, aspartame, sweeteners, preservatives like MSGS or MSG. That's that monosodium glutamate that's in a lot of foods. Got to watch those. One of the things about this thing, as we kind of move to completion here, is the complications. I told you we can talk about medications. Taking a combination of painkillers on your own, especially if it's the Excedrin types or the Motrin types, or what we call NSAIDs, NSAIDs, that's non-steroidal medications like Motrin and those types of Advil. Unless the doctor has you on them, and especially if you go to the doctor and you don't tell them you've had a transplant, it could be serious. You know, these NSAIDs, Motrins, Advils, they're kidney killers. Use of them over the long term will kill your kidneys, and if you've had a transplant, it'll work on your transplant too. So definitely, your medication regime for migraine headaches is always physician directed. Always. It's never an over the counter, I'm going to try this, I'm going to try that. It's always physician directed. So other things that are called triptanes, somatotryptanes, which are Imitrex and Tosmir, or Maxalt. If you take these medications under the direction of the physician, you're going to be all right. But overuse of them can cause severe problems with your kidneys. One of the things that happens is when you overuse a medication, if it's working for you, you start overusing it, it stops relieving the pain, and then it begins to cause headaches. All right. So I don't know what the effect of it is, but if you overuse or have a problem with medications, taking too many of them, it can actually cause the headache. So you don't get, it's just like a rebound effect. It starts, you take the medicine, doesn't work, so you take more. Well, if it doesn't work, you don't need to be taking it. Okay. So get in concert with your physician at all time. Your nephrologist, if you've been transplanted, you use pain medicines to break the cycle, not to continue it. Okay, we had a pretty good session here. It took a long time to get through. I do want to tell you something. Migraines over the long haul cause you a lot of stress. They beat you up. And I don't want anybody out there listening to think that they're not treatable, because they are. But I also don't want anybody out there treating themselves. I want you to think about things really carefully. If you start having migraine headaches or incessant headaches, constant headaches, you need to seek help. Go see your doctor. And if you've been transplanted, you need to be really, 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 really careful about what you take. If it's not physician directed, that's when you have problems. So enough's enough. Stay healthy and keep breathing.